It is a kind of no Batman vibes, but actually, homophobia, according to Michael Kimmel, is more of a fear that as men we will be emasculated, right? So,
Okay.
according to Kimmel, homophobia is actually an organizing principle that polices the way that we as men are meant to portray ourselves in a patriarchal society, right? So what that really means is that as men, we kind of, expected to keep up this man of steel, bad man don't cry kind of exterior, right?
Yeah.
And we're not really allowed to show emotion or anything that might be seen as feminine or taboo to masculinity.
Wow. As you say that, that's like so much pressure on men.
Yeah.
Well, according to this guy, David Plummer, basically homophobic ideas, he says, are socialized and reinforced into men, especially during the time of adolescence, when they start to kind of fall into peer groups in school, things like that, right? So what he says is that homophobic ways of thinking can put a pressure on men and boys to live up to standards of hypermasculinity, right? And this standard of hypermasculinity is actually unattainable because no man could actually ever reach that standard, And we see this in things like primary school when you play catch and beat up racing to see who's the fastest and things like that. You all might be familiar with the term ranking thing, right? And
well, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
As a
right,
man, yeah.
right. So according to Plummer, this is basically a way that males assert dominance and gain respect from other men, right?
Wow.
In addition to this, this sort of thing could cause feelings of exclusion when we are rejected by other men who subscribe to these ways of thinking, but not only men alone. We feel like this when we're not able to uphold these markers of manhood. And the worst part about these types of things is that we're unable to reach out for help because of the fact that we're socialized into thinking that real men and, real bad man don't talk about their feelings, essentially.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to keep up this man of steel, bad man don't cry kind of image. And unfortunately, these things ultimately take a toll on our mental health.
Wow, okay.
This Man of Steel image, this bad man and thing, I didn't even realize how much like it could. Every time we see stuff like big man thing, the subconsciously this big man thing, big man of steel image continues to be propelled in our minds. Would you say these homophobic ways of thinking can cause men to take their lives?
Right. Well, that's a pretty good question. So I wouldn't say it's the cause, essentially, but for sure, the literature suggests that homophobia could actually create and add to existing mental health issues, such as like depression and anxiety, that ultimately would lead a person to believe that the only way out of this state of depression and anxiety is to commit the act of suicide. And in fact, one of the central pillars of Michael Kaufman, who's a scholar in gender, talks about the triad of violence. And essentially what he says is that violence against oneself occurs when men repress anything that might be deemed as feminine, such as, feelings, and, this kind of ultimately causes aggressive acts against oneself, such as suicide, among other things.
With all of this happening, how could we not think about 16-year-old George Kissanjian who killed himself in 2011? This is exactly what started the Silver Lining Foundation by Jeremy Edwards. He found that there were no outlets for people to talk about their sexuality. Scott?
Right, yeah, and this isn't something that we only see in Trinidad, but also throughout the Caribbean. We are reminded that in 2016 that there was a mental health forum that took place in Guyana, and at that forum, mental health researcher Abdel Fudadin, he made the point that there's a lack of understanding with regards to sexuality among the public in Guyana,
Right.
and but it's more than just a lack of understanding of sexuality. It's a lack of understanding of gender and the systems in place like homophobia and hegemonic masculinity. that needs to be addressed. And this is why it is also a pro-feminist issue.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Scott, I'd love to have you talk more. We would love to have you talk more, but we're running out of time, so I'm really sorry to cut you.
No
Anything
problem.
at all that you'd like to give to the public about homophobia?
Right. So I think my key message would just be that homophobia is a concept that affects all men. It is not a affair of gay men or a Batman vibes thing that we've been talking about. It's something that all men are subjected to, and it can actually have a serious impact on us emotionally and mentally. Homophobia
Okay.
isn't specific to sexuality. What did y'all say when y'all were introducing me? Hashtag homophobia hurts? Yeah,
Yeah,
hashtag
exactly that. Exactly
homophobia
that.
hurts.
Yeah. Hey, thanks so much, man, Scott. Thanks so
Of
much for
course.
sharing with us. So there you have it, guys. Homophobia is a central organizing principle that polices the way in which men present themselves. But it doesn't stop there. As a result, it can have a severe impact on mental health and contribute to other factors such as suicide.